All right. Welcome to Book by Book. We're back starting another very large book in the Hebrew Scriptures. We just finished a few weeks ago the book of Isaiah. And so today we're jumping into the book of Jeremiah. And fun fact, Jeremiah is the second longest book in the Old Testament. It has fewer chapters than Isaiah, which has 66, but it is longer than Isaiah. So the longest book is the book of Psalms, and then we have Jeremiah coming in second place. So as we've been walking through the books of the Old Testament, we started in Genesis and went through the historical books, so the Pentateuch, historical books, and then moved right into the prophets. And so we've been following this trajectory because this is how the Hebrew Scriptures are laid out in the Hebrew Bible. So the Christian English translations adjust the order, but for the Hebrew Scriptures, they look at Joshua all the way through Malachi as prophetic books. And so the Joshua books, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, or Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, those are all considered latter prophets or earlier prophets, and then these are the latter prophets. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And then after the prophets goes into the writings. And so the writings include Ruth and Daniel, Lamentations, and then Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Song, and Job, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So those are the writings. And so we're kind of following the Hebrew trajectory for walking through these passages, just because it just makes sense to kind of lump them in.
Turn it louder.
Jeremiah, let's talk. I want to do a little bit of background for Jeremiah, and then we'll jump into looking at just 2 chapters tonight. These chapters are long as well, so I'm going to try to be focused and intentional. So Jeremiah was a descendant of a priestly family. He was not necessarily, there's no indication that he ever actually worked in the temple, but he is a Levite. And so he is a descendant of the priestly family. So he may have been very familiar with the language around the offerings and the sacrifices and the work of the priests in the temple. And so that's going to come about throughout his book. But then also he is very concerned with the impurity and the idolatry among the people of Israel. And so he is going to be addressing that over and over again. The timeline for when Jeremiah's ministry began. So remembering Isaiah was doing his ministry while Assyria was coming against the people of Israel. Assyria took the northern kingdom into exile and then came against the southern kingdom of Judah. And so that's Isaiah's ministry. And so that was about 100 years before Jeremiah was born. And so in between Isaiah and Jeremiah, there were other prophets that were working, but those were what we call the minor prophets. And so we're hitting the larger prophets first. And so about 100 years between Assyria's siege on Jerusalem and when Jeremiah was born. During Jeremiah's lifetime, he was born in the last years of Manasseh's reign, and his ministry covered over 5 different kings. And so while he was called very young, he had a good long ministry of about 40 years. And so in 627, one of the key pieces in 627, that's when Josiah began to reform the temple. If we remember when we were walking through 2 Kings, Josiah was anointed to be king when he was 8 years old. And then when he was about 18, they were cleaning out the temple because it had been misused and disused. And so they found the scrolls of the covenant, and they were like, we should do these things. And so Josiah began to bring a lot of this reformation about. And so Jeremiah was called in about 5 years, after that. And so so he's in this season where the people had already seen God's judgment in the form of Assyria, and God spared them, and there were minor reformations for a while, but good kings, bad kings, people continue to wrestle with idolatry. And then even after Josiah's reformations, right after Josiah died, the next king went right back into that idolatry and led the people back into that failure. And so he's a prophet who is grieving for his people. There's great sadness in Jeremiah as he, one, recognizes the cost of prophets, and it is not a popular job. And so when people go around like boasting about being a prophet, like they don't understand what that really means in the Bible, because usually the prophets are the people who are challenging the status quo and confronting people for their idolatry and their sin. And most people, when they are being confronted with their idolatry or sin, they don't like that. And so they would turn against the prophets. So Jeremiah knows that this is a risky business. And he doesn't want to, there's a sense that he doesn't want to do something that would dishonor the Lord, but also he doesn't necessarily see the fruitfulness of trying to correct the people because they keep ignoring him. And so he is a prophet with great heartbreak. So his ministry goes through all of the years leading through Babylonian exile. Like the Babylonians will come against Jerusalem, and they will sack the city, and they will put in puppet kings and take kings away, and all this different stuff is going to happen. And Jeremiah will be in Jerusalem while all of this is happening. And so the exile didn't just happen in like one fell swoop. There were different like waves of exile where the Babylonians took people. And so there's one point in the book of Jeremiah where he's writing a letter from Jerusalem to the exiles in Babylon. And that chapter is one of the most famous chapters in this book, is Jeremiah chapter 29. And so in that chapter, this 29:11, which a lot of people claim as their life verse, and it's a good, encouraging verse, but it's bigger than just how a lot of people read it. Is the text says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and to bless you," and all this different stuff. And people tend to read that as like the Lord wants to bless me. Glory, hallelujah. But we have to look at the context. These are people who are in exile, who are looking to give up their, like, why bother living anymore, essentially. And so the chapter 29 is writing to them to say, no, seek the peace of the city, pray for the city, plant gardens, build homes, give your children in marriage, and just keep living, because God's plan will continue. And so, so there's these great verses and passages that people may be familiar with as we're walking through Jeremiah. And my hope is that we will see that those single verses are much more powerful when we look at the broader context of the book. And so this is a wonderful book. And I hope that I do a good job walking through it. As I said with Isaiah, I'm not great with Hebrew, and I'm not great with Hebrew poetry. And so there are things that I'm sure I will miss that like a real Hebrew scholar would be able to get into. But I'm going to do my best to kind of highlight some things that stand out as we walk through. So the history around the Babylonian Empire is super fascinating. And I would encourage you, just as an extracurricular, maybe on your commute or your drive or something, to like find some podcasts about the Babylonian Empire, because there's tons of research about this. There's a lot like secular, faith-based researchers, all kinds of different folks talking about the Babylonian Empire. But just to read about the rise and fall of this kingdom is really fascinating. And so, but I don't want to spend too much time tonight going into all of that stuff. And so it might come out through our weeks. I do have an outline that I want to work through with Jeremiah, but some of these sections may be longer than I really can handle in 1 week. And so, but my hope is to walk through most weeks, 3 to 4 chapters. And so as we are walking through, and if you're wanting to read ahead, then if you aimed for 3 to 4 chapters each week, you would be pretty close to where we're actually going to be on that session. So, so let's jump in and we will talk about Jeremiah, starting in chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anatoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah, and through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. And so here, this is, many of the prophets have a introductory text. Who's writing this book? Not all the prophets do that, but so this is one of those things that is given to us as a way to say, what is the scope of this book? So I kind of went over that a little bit earlier, but one of the key pieces here is in verse 2. The word of the Lord came to him. For the prophet, it is important for him to be able to say, like, this is not my word. This is not my idea. This is coming from the Lord, and Jeremiah recognizes that he is just a conduit of God's message to God's people. And so that idea for the prophets is an important piece for how we should read all of these, is recognizing that there is a divine inspiration that's happening. There's also some wrestling that we're going to read, as Jeremiah's like, I don't really know how to do this. Even Ezekiel, when we get to Ezekiel, there's going to be even more of that. But then also there is a human component to this book. There is a human writer who actually put the quill to the parchment. And so there is an element of artistry and creativity that is expressed in this as well. But ultimately, this is the word of the Lord. And so this reign from his ministry going from Josiah through Jehoiakim, even though in Jehoiakim's reign, he had 2 sons that were at different points sitting on the throne as vassals and puppets of King Nebuchadnezzar. But that is a long time to be walking through this. And even in the beginning of this chapter, in this section, we get a sense of where this book is going, as it ends with when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. And so there is there's this movie called Sunset Boulevard, and it's a great movie, classic movie, but it ends with the narrator talking about this mystery, this case. But you look at the camera and the narrator is like floating in a pool as like a dead body. And that's kind of a morbid picture here. But as we read this, we have that same sense, like the exile's coming. The people are going to go into exile. And so we have that, like, try as he might, the people just didn't listen to Jeremiah. And so exile was inevitable. So they didn't repent. They didn't turn away from their idolatry. And so this tragedy of the city of God, that the city of Jerusalem being destroyed, is forecast to us right away, but also that they are removed from the land is given to us early on in the text. And so it's something to just keep in mind is the prophets never really gloat at the failure of the people of Israel. It's always the tone is a heartbreak. So they're not like saying like, I told you so, as much as like, I told you this would happen. And now we're all grieving. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So let's keep going. Chapter 1, verse 4. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say, I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. And so the word of the Lord starts with this commissioning from the Lord that is also highlighting God's foreknowledge of Jeremiah's role in history. And so when he talks about, I formed you in the womb, I knew you, I set you apart, all of these words are pointing to the idea of calling. And there are times where, people might take this verse and say, that's for me too. And we should be careful. Yes, does God know who we are? Does God have a plan for our lives? Yes. But Jeremiah had a particular role in the history of Israel that the Lord is highlighting here. Like, I don't think any of us would say, the Lord has called me to be a prophet over nations, right? Like, that's not something that we can just like claim for ourselves. And so part of the reason why God's call is in these terms is because Jeremiah is going to not want to do this. And so the words of the Lord to Jeremiah is like, no, I know what I'm doing here. I've called you to this purpose. And so even here, it's like, I don't know how to do this. I'm too young. I don't talk well. And so I don't know if, when you're reading through this, if that sounds like anyone in particular, but that's kind of Moses. Moses was older when the Lord called him, but he said, I'm not good at talking. And the Lord, again, did not take those excuses. Instead, he says, you're going to go where I say and do and tell people what I tell you. And in Isaiah 6, we get Isaiah's calling, and the Lord an angel takes a coal from the altar and places it on Isaiah's mouth, and he purifies Isaiah so that he can go and encounter God's presence in the heavenly throne room, but then also to go and preach. And so we have a similar touch and purification happening where the Lord reached out his hand and touched his mouth. And so the imagery that is given here as well, like the particular calling is I'm giving you, I'm appointing you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. And those are themes and images that are going to come up again and again throughout the book. And so just as a literature piece here of the Bible, like this is really well crafted foreshadowing for what the book of Jeremiah is going to be all about. This imagery of building and tearing down, of planting and uprooting, and all these things. We're going to see that repeat throughout the book of Jeremiah. So one of the things that we should take from this is, like, if we do feel the Lord calling us to something, one of the default positions that I think people have is like, I could never do that. I'm not gifted, I'm not called. And we start giving God all kinds of excuses to say, no, that can't be me. And here we see a pattern that is consistent throughout the Bible when God calls people is, I'm not going to take your excuses. And so if God calls us to do something, we must, it's just a lot faster if we just agree and obey. And it's a lot less drama in our lives if we would just surrender to the will of the Lord. And so something to keep in mind. All right, let's look at the next section, chapter 1, verses 11 through 19. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? I see the branch of an almond tree, I replied. The Lord said to me, you have seen correctly, for I am watching to see that my word is fulfilled. The word of the Lord came to me again. What do you see? I see a pot that is boiling, I answered. It is tilting toward us from the north. The Lord said to me, from the north, disaster will be poured out on all who live in the land. I am about to summon all the peoples of the northern kingdoms, declares the Lord. Their kings will come and set up their thrones in the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem. They will come against all her surrounding walls and against all the towns of Judah. I will pronounce my judgments on my people because of their wickedness and in forsaking me, in burning incense to other gods, and in worshiping what their hands have made. Get yourself ready. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. Today I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar and a bronze wall to stand against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. So these oracles that Isaiah or Jeremiah is presented with, these images. The first one is this almond tree. And one of the interesting pieces of how almonds look, like the actual almond looks like an eye. And so there is a symbolism here that would have been fairly common in the ancient world of when it says like, yes, it's an almond tree because I am watching you. And so not just one eye, but many eyes coming off of this tree, watching to see that God's word is fulfilled. And so he's watching Jeremiah, who's like, I don't really want to do this. And the Lord's saying like, well, I'm watching. But he's also watching the people to see if they respond to the message that Jeremiah is called to bring. And so there's a play on words here in Hebrew as well, because the word for almond tree is saked, and the verb for watch is soked. And so the saked is soked. The almond tree is watching. And so those kinds of puns and plays on words, those happen throughout the Hebrew Bible. And one of the reasons that it's so common is partly to help people remember, because rhymes and wordplay help people remember the message. And so there's times like that where that will come up. But then the second oracle is this like pot that's tipping over. The other day I made pasta, and I did my research for this last Thursday, and on Friday I made pasta. And so I was thinking about boiling the water and like then draining the water out of the pasta, and like that imagery of like the boiling pot of water. Like I'm always like very nervous that I'll slip and somehow like burn myself severely, like because I just am a worrier that way. But like knowing that it's tipping over and going about to like totally dump out, like that sense of like Jeremiah can see the pot coming from the north, and he's like, this is coming and there's nothing we can do about it. And so there's a sense of ominousness about it all, that this is coming. And so what the Lord says is like, this, you have seen it correctly. Both of these you've discerned correctly. And that pot coming from the north is these northern kingdoms that are going to come down and attack the people of Israel. And so when you look at a map, you might say like kingdoms from the north, Babylon is like due east from from Israel. So why are they coming from the north? And that is all about geography and topography, because there are hills and mountains, there's bodies of water, there's the river, the Jordan River, that is a natural barrier, so people can't just come straight across. And so they would have to go up the Euphrates River and then down through Syria to come into the land of Israel. And so when it talks about the people coming from the north, the Lord knows where Babylon is. He's not like, they're just north. He's referring to north as their plan of attack and their route that they're going to take. And so the Babylonians are going to come and they will bring this judgment, not just on Jerusalem, but on all of the towns and cities throughout the land of Judah. And previously, when the Assyrians came, they had already wiped out the northern kingdoms, and they had placed, they had mixed people. So they brought people from other nations into the land of Canaan. They took the people of Israel out and put them all over the place. And so Assyria really did try to mess up the population dynamics by spreading people all over the place, partly to keep them from becoming strong in one place, and then building a natural kind of resistance force. So they spread them out. And so this is the doom that's coming. But part of what's going on as well, he talks about these thrones in the gateway. And this is part of the ancient way that the gateways were the places where business was happening, but also where judgments were proclaimed. And so kings would set up business in the major gateway into the city to rule and to lead. And so when Absalom is comes back to Jerusalem, and he actually sets up his station of influence in the gateway to the city. And that's one of the ways that he wins people's favor. Is like, hey, I'm here helping you. I'm here helping make decisions. My father, he's way up in the palace. He doesn't care about you. And so here, the king of Babylon is going to come and just say, like, no, I'm in charge now, is what this is communicating. I'm in charge. I'm making these decisions in the gateway, and I'm going to rule this region. So this is an overwhelming message. This is something that Jeremiah doesn't want to tell people. It's something he probably doesn't even want to know, and he's afraid. But the Lord here promises him, like, I will make you a bronze wall and an iron pillar. And like being a bronze wall is saying, like, I will fortify you, Jeremiah. I will protect you. I will defend you like a metal wall can defend. But then, like, being an iron pillar is like, you're not just going to be here down on this level. I'm going to keep you up high. I'm going to keep you out of the fray for so long. And so he's trying to help Jeremiah understand that you can trust the Lord, that as a faithful servant, Jeremiah can trust the Lord. And so he's going to see a lot of hard things. He's going to grieve the destruction of the city, but at the same time, he can know that God is with him and God is protecting him. So that's chapter 1. So when we get to chapter 2, and sorry, I'm looking at my notes, and the notes I took are not here. So, but I remember things. So let's jump into chapter 2, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem. This is what the Lord says. I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the wilderness, through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of his harvest. All who devoured her were held guilty, and disaster overtook them, declares the Lord. Hear the word of the Lord, you descendants of Jacob, all you clans of Israel. This is what the Lord says. What fault did your ancestors find in me that they strayed so far from me? They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. They did not ask, where is the Lord who brought us up out of Egypt and led us through the barren wilderness, through a land of deserts and ravines, a land of drought and utter darkness, a land where no one travels and no one lives? I brought you into a fertile land to eat its fruit and rich produce, but you came and defiled my land and made my inheritance detestable. The priests did not ask, 'Where is the Lord?' Those who deal with the law did not know me. The leaders rebelled against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal, following worthless idols." So here the Lord is painting the picture. He's building his case. He's saying, remember the days when you were a new nation and you enjoyed being being my child, my family, and remember how I took care of you and I brought you to this place that you did not build for yourself. And so the land of Canaan, like there were cities that were already there that the people of Israel, as they drove the Canaanites out, they moved in, and there were fields that were already planted and orchards that were already growing. And the Lord saying, I gave you all that. I gave you a head start on civilization. And then it's like, where did you guys find fault in me? The Lord is grieved because he's like, I did all this for you. And now you, the nation of Israel, have turned away from me. Instead of enjoying the harvest and enjoying the bounty that the Lord provides, they started to doubt and say, like, well, where's God in his mighty power? Where's God in all these different things? And start to look to the idols. And so even the priests, as it's being laid out here, the priests are the ones who led them into idolatry. Instead of staying faithful to Yahweh, they started worshiping the Baals and leading them into these detestable practices. And so, so the Lord is building out his case. Like, I did all this for you, and you turned away. And so now, as he continues in chapter 2, verse 8, therefore I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord, and I will bring charges against your children. Cross over to the coast of Cyprus and look. Send to Kedar and observe closely. See if there has ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they are not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glorious God for worthless idols. Be appalled at this, you heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Is Israel a servant, a slave by birth? Why then has he become plunder? Lions have roared, they have growled at him, they have laid waste to his land. His towns are burned and deserted. Also, the men of Memphis and Taphanes have cracked your skull. Have you not brought this on yourselves by forsaking the Lord your God? When he led you in the way, now why go to Egypt? To drink water from the Nile? And why go to Assyria? To drink water from the Euphrates? Your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you. Consider then and realize how evil and bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no awe of me, declares the Lord Almighty. So here, as he's building his case, he brings these charges, and he also then calls witnesses in this divine courtroom. So the charges are, you have forsaken me, you have turned to these idols. And so he's like, well, let's go see what other nations are up to. These are my first witnesses. The nations, like, go to Cyprus, go to Kedar. Have any of you ever turned away from your national gods? And the Lord even says here, is like, even though I know and you know, those are just empty idols. They're not real gods. But no, these people of these other nations are more proud of their deities, their idols, than the people of Israel are of Yahweh. And Yahweh is the one who did these mighty deeds and these miracles for them and all this wonderful stuff. And the people of Israel are actually just kind of ashamed of him. So that's the first witness that he calls. But then he calls the heavens, and he says, be appalled at this, heavens. You see what's going on, all of creation. Isn't this terrible? And the heavens are like, yes, it is terrible. And so instead of trusting the Lord and his gifts and looking at these cisterns, he's saying, like, instead of receiving the living water that I want to give to you, you were willing to try to make your own living water. You were trying to make your own supply. And these cisterns that you dug, and cisterns are a reservoir of sorts that are usually like dug into the ground as a way to have water. Where you can't dig a well, you might be able to like dig a cistern and transport water into it, or capture rainwater when it rains, or divert water from a river into the cistern. There's all kinds of ways to harvest water. And so the problem, though, is if you do a bad job, the cistern will break and the water will just go filter back out into the earth. And so that's where they're at. They tried to do their own thing and it's garbage and it's not helping. And so they don't have the water that they need. And so these different dangers have come against them. When we're talking about Memphis and Taphanes, those are cities in Egypt. And so where the Lord defeated Egypt for the people of Israel, they kept going back to Egypt to try to get help. And so that's one of the things that he's saying here. These Egyptians are attacking you. I saved you from them, and you keep falling for them and letting them hurt you. And so that's one of the things that the Lord is grieving. And so it's like, why would you go back to drink their water? Why would you go and look to the Assyrians for refreshing water? The Lord wants to be the one who refreshes his people, who gives them strength, who provides for them. But they keep looking to the nations. And so while Babylon is brewing in this pot that's going to come from the north, even then, they're still just looking for other nations and alliances that maybe could help them. But Babylon is going to be too much and too strong. And they're going to destroy these other nations as well. Yeah. So let's keep going in verse 20, chapter 2, verse 20. And we'll read through 28. Long ago, you broke off your yoke. He's talking to Jerusalem, or to the people of Judah here. You broke off your yoke and tore off your bonds. You said, I will not serve you. Indeed, on every high hill and under every spreading tree, you lay down as a prostitute. I had planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. And then did you turn against me into corrupt wild vine. Although you wash yourself with soap and use abundance of cleansing powder, the stain of your guilt is still before me, declares the sovereign Lord. How can you say, I am not defiled? I have not run after the Baals. See how you behaved in the valley. Consider what you have done. You are a swift she-camel, running here and there, a wild donkey accustomed to the desert, sniffing the wind in her craving. In her heat, who can restrain her? Any males that pursue her need not tire themselves. At mating time, they will find her. Do not run until your feet are bare and your throat is dry. But you said, it is no use. I love foreign gods, and I must go after them. So the imagery here is of practicing idol worship. And so going, like throwing off their yoke and saying, I'm going to be free. I'm going to just follow my bliss and follow my heart, is kind of the vibe that the people of Jerusalem and Judah are saying. They're just going to do what feels good and follow their own desires. And so under every spreading tree, on every high hill, these are the places where idolatry was happening. And the Lord looks at idolatry as prostitution and fornication with false gods. It is a great betrayal to the Lord for his people to give themselves over to these prostitutes, or to these different idols. And so it's like they are prostitutes. So when we get to the prophet Hosea, most of his book is going to build on that image of the people of God being prostitutes, as God is continually trying to win them over by his grace and his love. And so we'll see that later on in Hosea again. But this imagery here, though, is like they are so overwhelmed with their desire for these idols. They are like an animal in heat, and like they cannot do anything other than try to find that satisfaction in their idols. And so this image of the swift she camel, the running, the wild donkey, like sniffing the air, like somewhere out there, there's a partner for me. And so they're looking for anyone that might fulfill their satisfaction. And the Lord all the while is like, I want to be not just, I want to be your husband, Israel, is what he's trying to say. Like, I want to be the one who loves you and provides for you, but you are satisfied to just pursue the pleasure of the temporary idols. And so that's the image that the Lord is giving. And like, these are offensive words. Jeremiah is not holding back. And so people are not going to like him, but this is intense language. And it's like, if our kids talk to us this way about things, like, we would like to have words to say to them, like, that's impolite, that's improper. But the Lord is trying to get their attention. So continue on in verse 26. As a thief is disgraced when he is caught, so the people of Israel are disgraced. They, their kings and their officials, their priests and their prophets, they say to wood, you are my father, and to stone, you gave me birth. They have turned their backs to me and not their faces. Yet when they are in trouble, they say, come and save us. Where are the gods you made for yourselves? Let them come if they can save you. When you are in trouble, for you, Judah, have as many gods as you have towns. So here it's saying, like, they, instead of calling out to the Lord all the time, they prefer to go to these idols they made. And Isaiah talked about this as well, where, they cut down a tree, half they used to burn and the other half they worship, thinking this idol that I made is going to save my family. And so that's this similar image that's going on here. But then when actual trouble comes, they're like, Lord, save us. And Yahweh is just saying, you chose to follow after your own heart, your own idols. Let's see if they can save you now. And so the Lord is handing them over to their own desires. Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 2, verse 29, and then I'll finish out this chapter here. Why do you bring charges against me? This is the Lord again talking to them. Why do you bring charges against me? You have all rebelled against me, declares the Lord. In vain I punished your people. They did not respond to correction. Your sword has devoured your prophets like a ravenous lion. You of this generation, consider the word of the Lord. Have I been a desert to Israel, or a land of great darkness? Why do my people say, we are free to roam, we will come to you no more? Does a young woman forget her jewelry, a bride her wedding ornaments? Yet my people have forgotten me, days without number. How skilled you are at pursuing love. Even the worst of women can learn from your ways. On your clothes is found the lifeblood of the innocent poor. Though you did not catch them breaking in, yet in spite of all this, you say, I am innocent. He is not angry with me, but I will pass judgment on you, because you say, I have not sinned. Why do you go about so much, changing your ways? You will be disappointed by Egypt, as you were by Assyria. You will also leave that place, with your hands on your head, for the Lord has rejected those you trust. You will not be helped by them. So here, the people are blaming God for their misfortune. And this is nothing that is uncommon even in our own time. People often say, like, why does God let bad things happen? And, often we have to just acknowledge, like, the bad things are happening because of decisions we made. Like, we got ourselves here, and these are the natural outcomes of our bad decisions. Often, sometimes they're just tragedies that are beyond our control, but there are often things that we do that get us into places where we feel like God's abandoned me. And what the Lord is saying here is, you abandoned us, people of Israel. You abandoned our relationship. And so what am I supposed to do? You did not want my help for so long, and now you cry out to me but let's see if Assyria and Egypt are going to help you. They haven't so far, but let's see. And so the Lord is kind of, there's a lot of talk about setting up boundaries, and people like, I put a boundary up so that they couldn't hurt me again. And so that's one of the things that like the Lord is saying, like, I told you the parameters of our relationship. I gave you the covenants and the law. I provided for you. I did all of this so that you would have a path of life to walk in, and you decided to go your own way. And so here is the natural outcome of your actions. And yeah, I mean, it's a hard couple of chapters to get started. Like the message just comes right to the people and says, everything that's about to happen, you brought upon yourself. And, as a pastor, like, it's one of those things that nobody really wants me to say in a meeting where they're wanting counsel. But often that is the truth, is like, you went your own way. How's that working out for you? At some point, you have to repent of going your own way. And that's the problem here, is the people are not actually repenting of their idolatry and their promiscuous relationship with these other gods. They're asking God for help, but they're not abandoning their idolatry, which is what got them in trouble in the first place. They're not turning away from their injustice to the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner among them. They are treating people like garbage. And then they're like, God, why is this happening to us? And the Lord is quick to grant forgiveness when his people turn from their sin. But what's going on here is the people are not actually turning away from sin. And the Lord is calling them out on that. You just want me to be your power, but you don't want to actually have a relationship with me. And that's something that I think we can just remember, or we should try to remember even now in our own time. There's a lot of people who call on the name of the Lord for power, but not for relationship. And when we look at our American Christian culture, or the American church culture, there's a lot of people who just want the power of God, but they don't really talk a lot about the love of God and the grace and the mercy, the repentance that God calls us to. But they want the power of God, but they also want to build up all their own idols as well. So we have some challenging times ahead of us. We are not Israel. So the words of Jeremiah to the people of Israel, we have to hear the message for them, and then try to translate that principle into our time. And so, yeah, like Israel had a covenant with the Lord. America does not. And so it's not a one-to-one comparison here. But in our own hearts, if we are in the new covenant with Christ, and we're claiming the name of Christ, and we are holding on to all of our own idols, then we have to be willing to let the Lord crush some of those idols and help us to turn away. And the sooner we recognize that we will not be helped by these idols, the sooner we can come to understand God's grace and goodness for our lives today. So let's stop there. If there are any questions or notes or something that stood out to y'all, I'd love to hear that. Let's chat about it a bit. Any thoughts, questions, observations? Yeah, Michael has an observation.
Say God we trust.
Yeah. So Michael's holding up a $5 bill, and it says on the back, on the Lincoln Monument there, "In God we trust." And so what are you noting with that? Well, that could be a covenant with God, or it could be something that people just printed on money. So we have to, because that's, I think, where most of it is for most people. Because a covenant can't just be something written on a piece of paper. It has to be written on our hearts. And that's one of the things that Jeremiah is going to talk about giving a new covenant instead of written on tablets of stone. He's going to write the covenant on the hearts of his people. And so one of the things that we have to be mindful of is there's a lot of people who are going to hold on to like those things and say, that's enough. It's written on our money. That's enough. And the Lord is going to say, no, over and over again. That is not enough. He wants our hearts. So even when we fast forward to the ministry of Jesus, when he's being tested in the temple and the religious leaders come and say, he has a right to pay taxes to Caesar. They're trying to trap him. And because to say no would mean he's a revolutionary. And so Rome would try to get him. But if he said yes, then he's a partner with Rome, and the people of Israel, the Jews, might try to turn against him. So they're trying to trap him. And so he says, like, whose image is on here? And they say Caesar's. And it's like, oh, he put his name on there. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. And so when we think about images, like whose image is on the money? Caesar. But whose image is on us? God. God. We are image bearers of God. And so God's desire, more than what's written on any document and any paper, is his word and his identification written on us. Are we bearing that image well and surrendering to him? And so the people of Israel, they had the covenant, but they weren't surrendered. And so we have to be careful and mindful of that. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, questions?
Observation?
Yeah, observation as well. Sure.
In Jeremiah 2:28, where it says, "Where are the gods you made?" It's the exact almost saying as Judges 10:14. In Judges 10:14, where he says, where are your gods? Where are your gods? Let them save you now. It's almost the exact same wording.
In 10:14.
Yeah. Do I have it right? 10:14.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the Lord speaking here to the people, like, hey, I just rescued you from Egypt like 2 generations ago, and here you are turning to these idols again. So go turn to the idols.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's like, God doesn't change his MO. Just like I don't change my parenting style with my different kids. I'm pretty much the same with every single one of them. I don't think God changes his MO.
Yeah. God is constant.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So they should not be surprised, as the Lord is saying these things, we'll let your gods help you. They should not be, that's not the first time they heard this. Like, my kids, like if I say, like, you need to turn your homework in, they've been hearing that for years. They're not going to hear that the first time, the senior year of high school. You should probably turn your homework in. So it's a consistent message that the Lord is saying, like, if you want those other gods, let them try to save you. They're empty. They're not going to do it, but that's what you believe. So yeah.
I'm like, that's in my house. It's the word rocket science. When I'm trying to get something across, it's not rocket science, you guys.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty simple. Yeah. Good catch, Carrie. Good catch. Making those hyperlinks through the text.
Symbolisms.
So yeah.
You're right in the part where he says he doesn't want lip service. God wants a real relationship, not just lip service. Just like we don't want our kids to say, "Yeah, Mom, I do love you," and then turn around and backmouth me.
Right.
I want them to truly love me, and that's what God wants from us.
Yeah. And in that, we should also note that the Lord displayed his love first, over and over again. And it's not just like a pettiness of like, why don't you love me? But it's like, no, do you not see all I've done for you? As God is saying, like, I'm the only one who could really do this for you. And they are like, nah, they're just going to do their own thing, follow their heart, which is one of the worst pieces of advice that we can really give people, is follow your own heart. The Bible says the heart is wicked in all of its ways. And we tell people, follow your heart. Bad idea. So.
I have to say, poor Jeremiah having to tell everybody this. I mean, they should have known better, but the fact that he has to stand up and stand strong and tell them this, kind of harsh.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do have the benefit of history. And so I want to make sure that we are not becoming chronological snobs, like based on our place in history, to look back on them and say, how come they don't get it? But the nations around them had all these idols. And one of the reasons idols are attractive is because it gives us a sense of control. Like if I do this, the idol should do that. But God doesn't play that game. He doesn't fall into that same kind of transactional relationship. And so the people can't control Yahweh. And it's really frustrating. But the Lord doesn't want to be controlled. He wants to bless. And so, yeah, it drives me nuts. Reading these things, it drives me nuts. But at the same time, I would say, Jason, check your own heart. Are there things in your life that you are trying to control in a way that could become idols if you're not careful? So,
Sure. I think sometimes even people's thoughts are their own idols. You know, they think what they think is the only way to be.
yeah, that is true. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Observations? No? Andrea, are you talking? You're muted.
I'm talking to myself. I think the imagery here is really I mean, it paints a pretty profound picture, like how skilled you are at pursuing love. Even the worst of women can learn from your ways, you know, and it's talking about the way in which they're pursuing their idols. I mean, it's pretty you know, kind of in your face, like in the face of God. And I mean, I would be a little terrified if, you know, someone was talking to me like Jeremiah is talking to them as the voice of God. So it's pretty,
Yeah.
I'd be a little scared.
Right. And the image here, though, is not just like you just really want a boyfriend.
No.
How skilled you are at pursuing love is like you are a prostitute calling out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the worst of women is like those really, really bad prostitutes, they can learn from you. That's the image that Jeremiah is giving, is like, y'all are whores.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's intense. And that's not Sunday morning language, y'all. Like that's not something you just go around saying. And, but that's what he's saying. So, yeah. People. What's that, Carrie?
Question. When talks about when Jeremiah is saying, you know, I don't speak well, and he says he's too young. When I did the research, it says he's about 20.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, when I looked on, you know, Google, it says 20, but I was thinking when he says, you know, I am so young, I'm thinking like he was 7 or something.
No. Yeah. Tony is still a young person. So like Jesus didn't start his ministry until he was 30.
Yeah.
And so
they're thinking anyone under 30 is young.
Yeah. So, so he considers himself too young, and he knows that there are these elder people. He's like, I don't want to confront my elders. So more than just his chronological age is like, there's an honor and shame dynamic where it's like, there's people above me and I don't want to ruffle their feathers because I'm too young. So there's
a lack of confidence too.
Yeah, which is actually not a bad thing in somebody who wants to speak for the Lord, is to say like, I know I can't do this. And God's like, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not you.
It teaches you how much you have to lean on God.
Yes.
For it.
Yeah. Very, very true. All right. Any other thoughts or questions?
I just had a question at the end of the first chapter.
Yes.
Verse 17, it says, get yourself ready, stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. What do you think God means by that? Like,
so
I will
here,
terrify you before them.
So here he's talking to Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Saying like, I'll protect you. I'll be with you. They are going to be overwhelmed by you, and the presence of you is part of what the Lord's been saying. And so like when they come at you and say all kinds of things about you or threaten you, if you are afraid of them, then I will make you even more scared. It's kind of what, like, I will terrify you before them. Like, they're going to try to scare you, and I'm going to make you a cowardly little lion. If you, but like, you need to remember that the God of creation is speaking through you, Jeremiah. So what do you have to fear?
Mhm.
So
Okay.
does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So, and that is, again, like, we should recognize, we got to be careful, because, you know, our tradition, we have a Pentecostal background as a church, and people look at these kinds of passages and we say, like, I'm a prophet of the Lord and I'm going to do these things. And like, we have to make sure, like, is the God really the one calling you to do this? Because people might step out and like be all zealous, and it's just them. And maybe God's saying, I didn't call you to do that. So we
Yeah.
need discernment in this process as well, to discern the will of and the ways of the Lord. So, but yeah, for a young person like Jeremiah to be asked to go and confront the high priest, who is basically like the most powerful person in the world, like don't be afraid. It's easy to say, right? Yeah, you'll be fine. Like, will I? I don't know. So the Lord's saying, like, yes, you'll be fine. And
He's
Jeremiah
also,
is one of the few prophets that we know that like wasn't killed. Like, they did a lot of things to him, but he like lived a good long life. And he didn't go, he wasn't executed by his enemies. He was in prison, but he lived, and the Lord preserved and sustained him for sure. So
on that note, so he's prophesying when the Israelites are in captivity, when they're in exile.
yeah,
So did he actually, I guess I haven't read enough. Did he actually see them released from captivity
no,
during his prophecy?
no,
No.
no, he would have died before that happened.
Okay.
So
Because again, I'm kind of ignorant in the whole timelines of things. So
okay, yeah, we'll get to it. So no worries.
no.
Yeah.
He also has to walk that line. He has to be the humbleness, but the strength of God behind him.
Right. Yeah, which is a hard thing to do.
Kind of like
But
Joshua.
yeah, kind of. So the people who God calls are usually the people with the least desire to be called.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Chris, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to note?
No.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss
You
you.
weren't
So,
really talking about yourself, were you, Jason?
what? What? Well, I do think that anybody who experiences a call into a ministry type role needs to walk with great humility and recognize that it's not them doing anything. It is God working in their life. So I try to live that out, and you will all be the ones who can actually say whether or not if that's happening. So all right. Well, y'all, let's wrap here, and we'll be back next week. And so if you are signed up for the Bible Engagement Project stuff, I do have that Zoom group tomorrow at noon. It's just going to be like a half hour. Just drop in and check in, men, women, just if you're available at all. And we're just walking through that Bible Engagement Project content. Each day is like really brief. It is not a ton of stuff to work through if you haven't opened it up and started working through that yet. And so, yeah, so tomorrow, if you want to jump in, and that's one of those things you can join through the groups page on the website. Or I sent you an email. I think all of you are maybe already signed up for that, but I send you an email with links on where to sign up for that. And it's a check-in as you can. If you miss a week, I'm not going to be.
What if you're like 10 minutes late?
Jump in. I'll see that you jump in. I'll let you in. So
Right out of a class at noon. So I thought, how am I going to do this?
yeah. And it really is like just checking in with thoughts and questions from the group study. So it's not going to be super structured. I just want to make sure we have a rallying point throughout the week that people can be a part of. So
is it the same Zoom as the station as this
Yeah.
invitation? So we
Yeah.
could just go into the email and click on this
Yeah, at noon. So,
at noon. Okay.
all right.
Wait. It's this same Zoom number? This?
Yeah.
If that,
I'm not the
that
best
belongs
at
to
security. I'm not the best at security. I don't want to have a bunch of different numbers and codes. So it's the church address and my phone number. I mean, that's it. So, yeah. So if you just save this email, you can jump in on Thursdays. I'll be there. So, all right. Cool, everybody. Have a good night. I will see you, some of you tomorrow. I'll see some of you Sunday. And if not, I'll see you next week. God bless everybody.
Thank you.